Hello everyone and welcome to the latest This Week in the Field. I am the handyman in the field, Dustin, and we are talking about this past week with work that we had done. This was an interesting week because, as I said in the last week's video, last week we had a very low volume or revenue week because I didn't close out a lot of jobs. This week, my intention was to start a couple of new bigger jobs, but also close out some of the other jobs I had pending. Some of that happened. Some of it is still on hold, which is going to throw some wrenches into things, which we'll get into. But it was a very busy week, and I've already made my schedule for the following week. And to be honest, this coming week is going to be pretty darn busy too. So let's just dive into it. Starting off on Monday, the first thing we did was we started off with, we have a porch enhancement job. I started putting together some shorts and releasing some shorts. So if you look at the recent shorts, there is a video that shows the space. Essentially, it's a room that was originally probably just a deck that was built out off of a house, and then they enclosed it in with walls, put a roof on it, and now it's essentially a 3-season room. It's got lots of windows, but there's a couple different issues with this specific space. First issue is that when they built the decking or the floor or however you want to call it, they built it directly over a concrete stoop. Now I don't know exactly how it is being held up. I don't know if there's joists. I can't imagine there is being joists in certain spots because of how exactly, or the dilemma that is arising is there. But essentially, they've got wooden planks that are going across in just probably about 6-foot sections. But the issue is when you get to right in front of the front door, there's a problem where the floor has actually settled to the point where you can start to see that the wood planks are starting to slightly have a bump to them because they've settled directly on top of the concrete stoop. So we have to basically do a couple of different things with this. One, fix the floor. She wants to put in actual flooring. We're painting the ceiling, which is an open area similar to like what you would see in a basement, if it was unfinished. There's some electrical stuff going in, which we have an electrician coming in to do. And then we also have, what else is there? There's some trim work, but overall, there's a lot of small things that that add up to a larger job. But there's been a couple of hiccups with this job, which was, she was out of town one week when I actually had time to get over there. Then I had other larger jobs pop up that were more pressing, so she got delayed a little, or that job got delayed a little bit. The more recent issue has been getting the electrician to finalize what day they're coming in, because some of what they are doing conflicts with what we have to do as far as getting everything finalized, painting, getting things situated. I don't want to be doing double work, and I don't want them to be working on top of new flooring or anything like that. So there's a certain level of trying to get certain things taken care of in a very timely manner, in a way that makes sense. I think I said this before about how sometimes it's very difficult to keep track of things. Well, it's harder to keep track of things when you have a lot of bigger projects. When you're juggling a lot of bigger projects, and that's not something you have all the time, it becomes very difficult to juggle that. And being someone who's typically on site for every job, there is no solution for me to be juggling, multiple things at once other than doing it as best as I can. So anyway, starting on Monday, we got there, we picked up the plywood. We're putting down half-inch, I believe it's half-inch plywood. It might be, it's not 3/4, maybe it's 5/8 subfloor plywood, all across the entire floor to get that to be more level. And then in addition to that, we will well, that was the idea, was we were going to get all the plywood set on the first day. We unfortunately did not get that done because it started to rain pretty hard, and there isn't, because of the confined space that we have, there's no way to cut these pieces inside because of the space. So as soon as we saw that it was going to start raining, we basically had to pack it up and leave for the day, which was a shorter day. Preferred if it didn't happen that way, but it just happened that way. So Monday was a slightly shorter day. It gave me a little bit of time to work on some stuff back at the office that afternoon, but most of it was, kind of a letdown because we probably could have finished the floor, to be honest, if we had just a couple more hours without the rain. So there was that. Tuesday, my employees, I should have said this earlier, but the 3 helpers that I have, one of them is on vacation for the next 2 weeks, this week and next week. So I only have 2 helpers. One of the helpers, let me think about this. On Tuesday, I didn't have any of that. I didn't have any of them. I worked on my own because the job that I had was just replacing some lights. So this is an existing customer. She had a ceiling fan in her dining room that she wanted to replace with a hanging chandelier. It's not really a chandelier. I know it's called a chandelier, but I don't consider it a chandelier. Just a 5 light chandelier. She had a dome light in her entryway that needed to be replaced with just another dome light, just something more modern. The top of her stairs, she had another dome light that she wanted to replace with something more modern. The ceiling fan that was in the dining room was getting installed into the master bedroom, and the fan that was in the master bedroom was just getting taken out and disposed of. And then finally, there was in her office, she had another fan that was coming out, and then a brand new fan was going in that spot. So everything went fine up until the last fan. And I typically always tell customers, try to stay away from fans that have the transmitters or the remotes, because those are the first components that fault. They'll be the things that break, and then you won't be able to replace them because it's very difficult to get replacement parts. This was a Harbor Breeze ceiling fan, and everything was fine up until I connected the power, and then all of a sudden I got nothing. The remote didn't do anything. The light didn't react to it. So after troubleshooting it, it has to be the transmitter. But the problem is you have to get another transmitter. Well, the best part is in the instruction manual, it says there are no replacement parts available for this product. It says it. So the thing is, all you can do is hope that, one, the ceiling fan that you have is something that's readily available, buy another one, and then return it saying that part was that one specific part was bad. So yeah, not a great scenario, but the customer was understanding. She bought the ceiling fan at Lowe's. She had some other additional things that she wanted to do in the near future. So I just said, if you pick up another fan and we could just swap out the transmitters and hopefully it works. If not, then obviously we've got a different problem, but that would be the next solution, is to try to swap out that transmitter. So the additional work she has in the future, which is going to be, I think, in 2 weeks, because she's already approved that estimate and it's already scheduled, is she's got an exhaust fan in one of her bathrooms. We'll do the transmitter for the fan, and then she has a smoke detector. They're just getting a smoke detector replaced for around the bedrooms. So those 3 things, that's in the near future. But this specific job, I was there significantly less time than I thought I was going to be, because things just went smoothly. The other thing was, when she said she had 2 ceiling fans, I assumed I was actually putting together 2 ceiling fans. I didn't have to, because one was already assembled and just needed to be moved from one room to the other. So it worked out better for me. She got a little bit better of a price because of that. So that came out to $525 for that job. Right after that, I sent, so like I said, I didn't have the employees. I had to go back to the property turnover that we did last week. And the reason why was because the one thing that was holding up that job from being completed was we had a cabinet pullout, a trash pullout bin, that the hardware was completely destroyed on it, and there wasn't any pieces readily available. So I had to buy a whole new hardware set to hold bins and everything. and it did come right away. I ordered it off of Amazon. Luckily, it came pretty quick, but I had to go out there and install that. So that was just a real quick trip. Get that installed, get it done. We're all set. So that technically got billed out. That property turnover was $6,200. We'll come back to that property in a second here. But on Wednesday, we had a couple of things. The first thing, I had my LATIP meeting. There's a couple of new things that came up, future jobs that came up from that. Nothing huge or big, just little things that will keep the faucet running. The next job was a garage trim job. This customer is a new customer, contacted me about 3 or 4 weeks ago. The main thing that he had a problem with was he had some aluminum trim on his fascia that had gotten blown off during a storm. So he wanted that put back on. Now, I've said this a million times about how I don't like getting over a story and a half. When he sent me a picture, it was just at that story and a half height. The problem was that it was such an awkward angle and the garage had such a high pitch that the only way to get to where I needed to go was to basically set up the ladder on the front of the house, go around the entire back, get up to the second level, and then do it from the rooftop. So that was relatively quick. It sucks. I can't stand being on roofs. Between the shingles scratching at you, if you're not wearing pants or you have short sleeves like I always do, rubbing up against shingles, I hate it. Luckily, it wasn't too hot, thank goodness, because that's the other thing that sucks about being on roofs is when it's too hot. But the other thing that he added on was he had trim around his garage door. So you have essentially like the door stop with the little rubber gasket that keeps the bugs and the air from blowing into your garage. You have that, but then there's underneath that, you have essentially a 1x6 piece of trim that just adds more to making the entire frame of the door just look nicer. His trim was pretty rotted out, and the doorstop had multiple spots where the rubber gasket was ripped. So he wanted it all replaced. So I had suggested the PVC trim, so that way there's no maintenance involved. I will typically go that route if a customer, leans that way, because the cost of it is expensive, but you don't have to worry about painting it or worry about it fading or any of that kind of stuff. It's just not cheap. You're talking a $10 board compared to the same board is like $40. It's not a cheap board. So we were able to get this taken care of. It was relatively quick, and I knew it was going to be quick because there's not much involved in it. My helpers met me on site about halfway through that job. I just had basically got everything demoed from the old frame and was starting to get things set up when they showed up, and we were able to, it was helpful that they were there because they were able to hold some of the pieces up while I was doing it. Now, I could figure out how to do it myself, use one of the old pieces to prop it up, but it's just easier and just goes smoother when you have an extra set of hands. So situations like that, being someone who's worked by themselves for years, it's nice to have that extra set of hands when it comes to that. So that job wrapped up, $650 for that job. After that, we went to a property that, if you've been paying attention or you're a long-time watcher, it's the same property that had the water damage at the beginning of June. And the water damage, we needed a restoration company to come in to remove carpet, drywall, undo all of the heaters. It was not a quick thing at all. But that same property, I have worked at that property multiple times. It's for my main property manager, and I've worked at that property. I've done a number of different things. I've been in every single unit. There's only 4 units, but I've done a variety of different work there. And I don't mind going that direction because it's south from me, but it's kind of remote and rural. So the thing is, to get there, you're driving down roads. There's no traffic. You just drive. It's a nice, easy drive. I love that kind of work, or love those kind of locations, I should say. And actually, the garage trim was also south. It was just in a different town, but that was the same thing. Just straight shot, rural, no traffic. You just get there. And I would much rather do that than drive on the interstate any day, because there's crazy people who drive on the interstate who just sometimes just don't care. They think that traffic is a obstacle, and they're in the middle of an obstacle course and whatever. Anyway, so back to the building. So the building, essentially, they have a front door and they have a back door. Now, the majority of the tenants, they use the back door. And when you get in, it's just immediately a split level. You go down and there's 2 units downstairs and a laundry room. And then upstairs, 2 units, and that's it. It's a very straightforward building. There's nothing, unique or special about the building. It's the bottom level is, it's a sub level, I think it's called. It's basically half the floor is underground. Anyway, when I was there, one of the very first times, way back in January or February, for a turnover for one of the upstairs units, I noticed that the railings were rotted beyond belief. And they're aluminum railings. The bottoms were rusted through where you could essentially just shake it a little bit. Again, there is another short that if you are interested in seeing more about what the railings look like, that'll give you an idea. There's going to be obviously pictures of what the railings look like before, but specifically if you want an idea of the entire thing, take a look at the short that I released for that project. I'm trying to do shorts for some of the bigger projects, so there's more to show. And maybe we'll just plug the short in here too. I don't know. That's up to my editor, which happens to be my son, who is also one of my helpers. So shout out to him who edits the videos. Anyway, the railings were in bad shape. So we were basically, what we had said was, let's pull out the railings, get new railings installed, but also focus on the overhang, which was, there was rotted fascia around the edges, and the underside plywood had some cracks in it because they use really thin plywood. And then paint everything and then get everything good to go. So basically, we were there for 3 different days. The first day was just basically demo. We got it all demoed out. Everything was pulled out and cleared out. That way we could identify if there was any issues. The only thing we had to do is we had to add in new blocking for the railings because the old blocking was pretty bad. But that was on Thursday. So we were there for the rest of the afternoon. Once we got everything demoed, that was the end of that day. Thursday, I had a job early in the morning, also further south, a little bit more south than normal for me, but I had a new customer. He has a rental property, and essentially what he he had a problem with was his tenant had 2 issues. One, they had a toilet that he believed had a leaking wax ring. So he wanted it reset or, put in a new wax ring. That was the first problem, and then to address the leak. And then the second problem was when they plugged in air conditioners, window air conditioners in 2 different rooms, they were tripping the breaker. Well, at some point, something happened, and now it wasn't tripping the breaker. None of the outlets were working. So it was more of like an electrical diagnosis. So I got there, and the first thing I did was start testing all the outlets to figure out which ones worked, which ones didn't. Looked at the panel. Of course, nothing's labeled. I ended up figuring out that all 3 of the bedrooms were on the exact same circuit. It was a 20 amp circuit. For the most part, it was, in the grand scheme of things, electrical diagnosis is just crossing items off a list. That's essentially what it is. You have to eliminate certain things. So the first thing I did was make sure that the panel has power going out. So it's not the breaker. There's actual power going out to the circuit. You have to identify which is the circuit, because if there is no power, you can't use a circuit tracer to figure out where the power is, because it won't tell you. So you have to figure out where the power goes. The way these rooms were, they had overhead lights that had gotten installed at some other point that were not attached to the electric on the outlets. The reason why it was tripping was because they had two air conditioning units, but also one of the rooms had like a computer set up for like gaming or something. And then the other room had a litter robot, air purifier, a fan, like a bunch of stuff that was plugged in that room too. So there just was too much going on. Anytime the air conditioner is going to kick on, it's going to probably trip it. But it's not tripping the breaker. So we eliminated the idea of it wasn't the breaker. There was power going out. We figured out that once we figured out the three rooms were all attached, it was trying to figure out where the disconnect from that specific room to the next room is. But as you know, if you've been around electrical, it never goes to the next outlet that's closest. It goes to whatever way makes the most sense for when they're wiring it. Sometimes it's going up and over to another spot. Sometimes it's going around because they don't know exactly where the closet's going to be pulled in, and you're not going to run the wires through the closet. There's a lot of different options, but the thing is, ultimately, you just have to figure it out. So I took some outlets apart to see if there was issues with any of the outlets. There was no power coming to any of them, so it wasn't that. Went into basement / crawl space and figured out that the electric was going into a very specific spot. I was able to, what I noticed from the spot is that one of the outlets on the inside walls was had a line going into the box that was directly below where this air conditioner was. Now, I don't know which box, I don't know which way it's being fed, because the stuff that I can see on the underside isn't every outlet. It's only some of the outlets. And honestly, it was mostly for a couple of those back wall outlets and that one inside wall outlet. So I take the inside wall outlet out or apart, take it off the wall to check the wires, nothing. The interesting thing was the junction box downstairs had power that powered the outlet. The three that I could see that it powered was the outlet for the one air conditioner, the outlet for the other air conditioner, and this one inside outlet. So it's just basically figuring out which one of those three outlets had the issue. So it turns out it wasn't the inside outlet. It was actually the air conditioning outlet in the right bedroom. What happened was there was just a loose connection. But it took an hour and a half to figure out that that's what it was. Yeah. And that's why I cannot stand electrical diagnosis, because the problem is that it could take you a while. So I don't do a lot of this, because the other problem is that initially when I was approached about this job, it's probably a bad outlet. This has happened before. We've had a bad outlet and the outlet just needed to be replaced. I can swap out an outlet. That's not a problem. But if it's not an outlet that needs to be replaced and it's actual wiring issue, or it's something to do with the panel, it's mostly the wiring. I'm not running new wires. So if a breaker is bad, you can figure that out pretty quickly, but that's not super common in a lot of the places that I see. So long story short, once I got the outlet hooked, reconnected properly, there was no issues. So immediately we had power through all the outlets. Everything was good. But like I said, it took an hour and a half to do that. Now, I originally quoted the customer $180 to do everything, the plumbing issue and the electrical issue, which gave me about 1 hour's worth of time, because I knew the toilet wasn't going to take that long. I knew the toilet was probably going to take about 20 minutes if everything went according to plan. Like, as long as the flange was good and all of that, I could get the toilet pulled, put a new ring on it, and then get it all set within 20 minutes. So that left me about 40 minutes for the electrical diagnosis, and then the little bit of overage was because it was a little bit further out than normal for me, but then also there's materials with the wax ring and stuff like that. So that was the whole idea. Because the diagnostic took an hour and a half, you have to start thinking about how you're going to adjust your price now, because this took way longer. It wasn't just simply an outlet that needed to be replaced. You basically had to figure out how this was a problem. Now, you could walk in and immediately take every outlet apart and start reconnecting everything and checking everything, but that didn't make any difference. The other thing that was weird was when I pulled that outlet out, and the problem is I'm trying to remember if I had the power on or not. I checked the wires on that outlet, and there was no power coming into them. And maybe I had the breaker turned off at that point, but that's the only thing that I never understood was at some point, all I did was just undo the outlet from the wall, and that allowed it to get a connection. So anyway, long story short, ended up making taking the toilet up. There was literally like no wax ring left. I don't know what happened, but it was completely deteriorated, and there was like no wax whatsoever. So that's why it was causing a leak. So I put new bolts on, put a new wax ring, hooked it back up, used a couple, I don't think I have them sitting here. Home Depot has some new items in stores. Danco makes it's almost like a rubber leveling shim for toilets. Those are great. I've used the crappy plastic ones where you basically have to trim them if you don't want them to show. These rubber ones are great because it actually, instead of it being hard, it actually can adjust to like those minute adjustments to get it to not wobble. So that was kind of cool. That was something new. So that job, I ended up pricing it at $280. I definitely lost money because I was there for 2 hours and I had materials associated with it, but I felt weird trying to charge as much as I needed to, which probably would have been around $330 or $325 in that neighborhood for the actual time that I was on site. Now again, I don't use a hourly rate except internally, but that's how you judge whether or not you were profitable, essentially, by making sure that you're as close to that rate as possible. That said, customer had no issue with the 280, so maybe they wouldn't have had an issue with the 2 or 325. I don't know, but I wasn't trying to push my luck either. And that's something that I have to do in general. Like if I spent 40 minutes on the electrical and it didn't work, maybe I should have texted them and said, hey, the electrical's taking a lot longer. I've hit the kind of max time that I already quoted you on. I can keep going, but it's going to start adding up. I don't know how far you want me to go. And then maybe he says, well, as long as it doesn't exceed 300, well, then in that case, I don't know that I would have been able to finish, but then maybe I switch over to the toilet, do the toilet, find out how much time, so that way it's an exact amount, that kind of thing. That would have been maybe the only other solution that I could do in the future, but $280 for that. Immediately after that, I drove over to where the railings were. The employees met me there as well. And we basically, that day, we got all of the wood set in place. We had we started doing painting on the overhang. We had to caulk everything because there was gaps along the brick and along some the other spots. So we had to get everything caulked, get everything set. And that was essentially it for that day. It doesn't sound like we did that much because there was just a lot of minute things. One of the other shorts was that there were bees up inside of the overhang. It was actually, interestingly, 3 different bees nests in there. There was a paper wasp nest that was dormant. There was some mud wasps, or I think there's another name for them, but they have like mud tubes. We found some of those, and then there was a normal bees nest too. I think just normal wasps, not the honeybees, but just normal wasps. They really liked that spot, and we basically had to deal with that, and then obviously had to get everything closed back up. But we have to try to keep them from going back inside of their. But yeah, so we basically just moved their nests somewhere else, and if they do it, I don't know how it works with it, but it's not, like I said, it's not honeybees. So please don't send the honeybee brigade after me, because I would never mess with honeybees. I'd end up getting somebody to come out and deal with that if it was honeybees. But that said, that was Thursday. Pretty straightforward, just getting more work done, getting more. So the plan for Friday was we're going to be at these railings all day, knock it out, get it done, complete the job, be able to bill it. The problem was that, that was my intention. If you remember last week, I said, we might have the highest week ever. Well, if you tack on the amount that we would have had from the railings to our weekly toll, it would have been our highest week. We ran into some issues. So essentially the railings had to get in place. There's some cutting that's involved to make it work. So because you have to essentially like customize this to a certain degree. It's not straightforward. The railings come in very specific shapes. There was a bunch of different problems that came up, just compound. Because as you know, when one problem comes up, they all just snowball and becomes a bunch. First problem was I ordered a large number of additional parts to make sure that I did not run out or I did not have anything defective because these pieces were not available in stores. I ordered them from Lowe's. I ordered them in April. To give you a perspective, it did take about 6 weeks to get these parts. However, when the parts came, they came in a box. One of the boxes was like completely destroyed, not in great shape. I was kind of pissed about it because I was like, this stuff is going to get scratched. I was trying to not have to worry about painting it. I'm going to have to paint it regardless now, but I was trying not to have to paint it. And I was kind of pissed that it came the way it did, but I also didn't realize that the box that had the posts, they had shoved all kinds of the hardware in there. I didn't know that because there was a completely separate box that they had sent me with other hardware. So when we pulled all the stuff out, because we had dropped these materials off at the building about a month ago, because I couldn't keep them sitting in my shop. It was just taking up too much space and they were heavy to be constantly moving. I'd never looked inside the box. It's 100% on me. But we were shorted like a ton of the hardware. There was probably about $100 worth of hardware that was not in the box. Now, my guess is that they packed it and it was supposed to be in the box, but when it arrived, because the box was damaged, they probably fell out at some point. Luckily, I did not need any of those specific parts to complete the work because, like I said, I ordered extra. But if I didn't order extra, I would have been in a bad spot because essentially it could have taken a couple of, I think the hardware came pretty quick, but even so, the last thing I want is to have a job that I have half done with no railing. There is an older gentleman in that building who would use the railing, has Parkinson's, military vet. I don't need him to not be able to get into the building because there's no railing. That said, that was the first problem. The second problem is because I ordered the parts when I did, and they did take 6 weeks to arrive, I can't return any of the items. So any of the excess stuff that I have to either figure out some way of selling it or I'm going to eat the cost on that, which that was not the intention. The intention was to do this and be able to return it. I did not pay attention to when I sold or when I purchased the items. And the worst part is that even though it took them 6 weeks to ship it to me, that doesn't extend the return policy, which I cannot stand that whatsoever. You somehow, half your return policy is eaten up by the shipping time, but yet somehow you're expected just to deal with it. So that sucks. Next problem, one of the specific item that it said to use to fasten the brackets to the concrete was wedge bolts or wedge anchors. And we drilled it exactly the way we were supposed to, put it in exactly at where we were supposed to. None of these stupid anchors would work. After troubleshooting it, it appears that because the concrete is so old, there's like large aggregate inside of the concrete, which can prevent the anchors from working. Okay, fine. So because we're further down south, there's not a lot of major hardware stores. So there's a hardware store called RP Lumber that's right there. I look online to try to figure out what else I could use, and they say Tapcons. Now, I've had the worst luck with Tapcons. I don't know what it is, but even when you buy the ones that say resist head snaps, they always snap. I don't know why. It always happens. It doesn't matter. The problem is you've got two options. I've got a drill driver that I always have. You turn that down to the torque where it'll stop and it won't over torque. It doesn't go deep enough. You put in the drill function, it'll drill, but it'll probably end up snapping. Use the impact. Chances are it's going to snap. I hate Tapcons with a passion because this constantly happens. There's some other things that I've used, but Tapcons, they always seem to have a problem. They don't grip well in the brick. Use the bits that they tell you to use, and then what ends up happening is there's too much resistance when you're drilling in the screws, and then the screw, there's too much torque and it breaks. And then the hole that you have has a broken screw inside of it. So now you have to adjust where you're putting the hole. Well, adjusting and putting the hole is not such a bad thing, except for if it's very precise, like when you're putting railings down. Now, the plus is the brackets have 4 spots. You don't need all 4 spots, but you snap off 2 and you're at kind of at a bad spot where you're going to have to shift. So Tapcons was the first suggestion. Didn't work. And the worst part is the stupid boxes of Tapcons are like $40. So that, just love that extra expense that just eats up. Then the solution was to drill holes, put a threaded rod in, and then just use an epoxy in the hole and let it cure, and then you can tighten everything up. So that's what we ended up doing. The problem, of course, is that, and I don't know what the cost of this is at Home Depot, so it could be similar or it could be cheaper, I don't know. The smaller hardware stores, they tend to be just a little bit more expensive because it's more of a convenience. You're not having to drive all the way to Home Depot. They don't have as low of prices as Home Depot. So one tube of the epoxy stuff was like $30. I had to buy a box of carriage bolts, carriage bolts that I had to cut off the heads because they didn't have any threaded rod. So I had to make it work, and I did. We were able to get everything set up. The railings all got in. The only thing we have to go back and do is paint the railings, because the railings, there's too many spots on them to not paint them. So for the most part, I'm happy with how the railings turned out. Trust me when I say, I'm sure you're seeing the picture right now. They look a million times better than they did. The only thing that I'm not a fan of is how the brackets, because I had to adjust the brackets a couple of different times, there's spots on the concrete. So I'm debating on whether or not I'm going to touch that up. I don't know that it's necessarily worth touching up, because anything that I put on top of that is potentially going to flake off after a short amount of time. There's not a whole lot of great options for, fixing that kind of, those little spots on concrete. The plus is there's no foot traffic in those areas. So maybe I use self-leveling, the stuff that you put in when you're trying to fill a crack, and just use that as, in a real thin coat so that it just fills it up so that it's, level with the rest of the concrete. So that job's not done. So I'm not counting that in this thing, but that day sucked. It was a very long day. I did not plan on being there as long as we were. And there was just so many problems with the hardware. Yeah, it was a stressful day, but that was all Friday. As far as business stuff for the week goes, we had just a couple of things. We're on the second to last week of my business coaching sessions. The topic this week was SOPs and or if you don't know what an SOP is, standard operating systems that you can build and put in place so that people know how to do things. Some of it got so minute to me that I don't know that it was necessary. Like he was saying that you could build an SOP for how to change an outlet or how to change a ceiling fan. And I just kept thinking, I don't know if you have the time to do something like that, and on top of that, you're able to give that to somebody and they're actually referencing to it's one thing if you're trying to give them a list of stuff to diagnose. Create a digital manual that they can reference, they have access to if they're on a job site and they're trying to figure something out. Installing a ceiling fan is probably not entirely necessary for you to have a written manual, considering the fan comes with instructions by itself. No, completely other things like the admin side of stuff, call scripts, things like that, 100%. But we covered that in a different lesson. So I don't know that there was a lot this time around. Now, one of the other things that was discussed was things that we're good at and bad at. I have no problem admitting I have a hard time keeping track of all the customers, all the stuff coming in. That's one of my biggest problems. The other problem I have is over or underestimating the amount of time things takes. Because, if you niche down to a certain level where you're doing like basically 6 different things, 10 different things, you get very good at knowing exactly how long things take. But when you have one day you're doing, aluminum railings on a concrete landing and having to do the wood repair on the overhang, I can tell you I've never done aluminum railings before. I've painted them, but I've never installed them. It's straightforward. It's not that it was hard. It's just, it takes time. And if you haven't done it, you don't know what to expect. The wood repair on the overhang, that was straightforward. It was pretty much exactly what you would think it is because I've done plenty of wood repair, rotted wood repair. But then you're doing lights one day and it's relatively quick, easy. And then the next day you're diagnosing an electrical issue with an outlet and you have to figure out exactly where to start and where to go. So it's different because you do such a wide range of things. You have to have somebody who can do the wide range of things. That's my mentality. Outside of that, there really wasn't any other big business stuff this week that happened. I'm just essentially chugging along. I'm trying to make sure that I try to get as much as I can get done before my employees go back to school. Because I think it's like from the point I'm talking now, I think it's like 3.5 weeks until they go back to school. So essentially 3 full weeks of work to try to knock out as much as possible. So I want to get that porch done. We have a bathroom refresh that's going to take a couple of days that I want to get done. And we've got a couple of other things here and there. The one thing that I didn't bring up was after that property turnover got done, the property manager reached back out to me the next day and said that the owner of the property had some concerns. Listed 5 different things. The first item on the list was that there was some patches that we did where we removed the mirrors and the patches were kind of rough. Now, from the pictures, they absolutely look rough. I did not realize that they were that rough. That's completely on me. So I have no problem, going back and fixing something like that because I did 3 coats to, try to get these patches to be good. The third patch, I did not get back and sand before the helpers got in there and painted. That's on me. So that would be something that 100% we would go back and do. Now, the remaining things on the list were things that were either outside of our scope or things that we did that we weren't paid for to begin with, or we weren't getting paid to begin with. So one of them was there was some patches in the hallway that were rough. Those weren't even us. That was there before we actually had pictures of the hallway prior to that because I knew it was going to become a thing. The patches themselves, they look like somebody splattered, like caulk, like silicone caulk on the walls or something like that. And that's why it looked like crap. I was not getting paid to come in and sand the walls down so that they could be, back to where they needed to be. If it was like a huge bump, we did scrape. But the thing is, there's only so much you can do. So that's the first thing. The second thing was there was one of the bedrooms, for whatever reason, it had a blue ceiling. We had to do some touch-ups in the corner, and we weren't going to buy blue paint to repaint the ceiling blue. So we just decided we'll just quickly paint the ceiling. That was kind of a last-minute add, and there was a spot where it's very clear that when it dried, there's a spot where the roller mark just left a spot. Again, it's not something huge. You take some ceiling paint and a brush, and you're done. I don't know that I would necessarily think that someone would require me to go back out there to do a swipe with a brush. But I can understand the frustration. But again, we did not charge any money for that specific work. Another thing was in the bathroom, there was a light above the sink and the vanity that didn't work. It didn't work when we did the inspection. It didn't work at any other point. We did replace the reason we couldn't figure out why it didn't work was because none of the switches did anything. There was 2 switches and neither one of them did anything for that light. Both switches worked for the fan and the light from the fan light combo, but they did not control anything for that specific light. And there was no other switch. And the thing is, for a rental property, if you have a light that works, That's what I would assume is the important thing. The light not working above the sink, the light was part of a built-in medicine cabinet, wooden medicine cabinet. And there's a couple of things here. One, I never said we were going to do anything with it other than try to swap out the bulbs, because I assumed that maybe it just was a bulb issue. When it became not a bulb issue, that's not something that we never said we were going to replace the light or figure out why the light wasn't working or do anything like that. And the reason why is because you're opening up a huge can of worms where you go from replacing a bulb for a couple bucks to replacing a light fixture that's incorporated with a medicine cabinet, that now you have to figure out how to replace a medicine cabinet that's wood that matches all the other wood in the room. That's not something that I wanted to open up the can of worms on. There was already some other work in that property that they did not want to do because of the costs associated with it. So the last thing I wanted to do was tack on, a couple $100 to take care of something that might be solved by a couple dollar bulb, and then having to warrant the cost on that. So there was that. And then the other thing was, what was the last one? There was another issue with some sort of, there was a switch in one of the other rooms that they wanted replaced. Okay, but that was never mentioned to us before, and we didn't have it on our list. So what it felt like was, these patches are rough. You're going to have to come back and do this. When you come back and do this, just do these other things too. And that's not how that works. I'm not going back out there to do multiple other things. When I do a property turnover, I'm very specific on, here's what the agreed upon work was, and here's the additional stuff we did on top of that. So that way you're getting your value because we take care of these things. That doesn't mean that you get to then come back after the fact and add a third line of other things you want taken care of that you're not going to pay for. That's not how that works. And I'm very particular about doing that because I want my property managers to know that they're getting a good value. They see my cost. They know that there's a certain level of, I'm going to get things taken care of, but within reason. I'm not going to go in and swap out flooring for no reason if that wasn't agreed upon and I'm not getting paid for something like that. But, extra light bulbs being out or, something, a shower that needs to be recaulked or something, that's not something that we wouldn't necessarily take care of. I don't nickel and dime them, and I would expect them not to try to come back and try to get every little thing done. Rental properties are a certain thing. You're paying a certain price. This entire unit was a 3-bedroom, 2-bath building or house, single family house, with a dining area, kitchen, living room. There was also a back room. We painted almost the entire house. We did not paint one of the bathrooms and we did not paint the back room, but all the bedrooms, living room, hallway, kitchen, dining area, all was painted. And the other bathroom was all painted. We painted, I'd say 75% of the ceilings in those exact same rooms. Some of the ceilings, I think there was 2 ceilings in the bedrooms that we didn't paint because there was no issues with them. But all of the main living areas, including the bathroom, we painted the ceiling for. Now, if you ask somebody how much almost essentially a full house painting is going to be, walls, ceiling, I had a guy that worked for me last year who he charged $450 to paint a room. That was a standard bedroom, did not include the closet, but did include the ceiling, no trim. Now, I didn't do any trim. If you just count the rooms that we're talking about, you got 3 bedrooms, a bathroom, the hallway would count as 1, so that's 5, dining room 1, and living room and kitchen. You're talking about, what is that, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 rooms, $450. You're talking just for painting alone. If you were charging $450 for the ceilings and not closets, you're talking, what's the math on that? $450 times, what did I just say? 8. This is becoming something I probably shouldn't have done in the first place. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 rooms, $450. That comes out to like $3,600. So that eats up more than half of the total work for just the thing, in addition to all the other stuff we had to do. And generally 450 does not include any drywall patches. It does not include the massive patches we had to do for the mirrors. That's extra. So my point is, and that painter, in my opinion, he underpriced, because I had plenty of other painters they're way more expensive. I've had people say like a whole house paint is like $6,000 for like a a smaller scale house. It's just not cheap. And that's if you have the same colors, because every color is going to require more work and more paint. Buying one 5-gallon bucket is great, but if you have to buy multiple 5-gallon buckets, it's a completely different, or multiple gallons of paint, that's a completely different story. So my whole point of this is they get a decent deal because it's a rental property. I go in knowing it's a rental property, and I'm doing work related to it being a rental property. Now, if they tell me they're going to sell the property, there's a different level of work and there's a different level of cost associated with that, because they are looking for someone who is going to buy the property. That's a completely different scenario. So the thing that's frustrating about this is that last week, the entire week was essentially my helpers were on that job site. So that $6,200 is right now on hold. And essentially I've got a bunch of supplies. I'll probably get paid before the bill comes due for that, but I have to pay payroll. So I have to cover the payroll for the employees. When it was just me, it wasn't as big of a deal, because me not getting paid was not a problem. Me not paying the employees is a different story. So that's the other thing. I know that some of the other guys that I've watched on YouTube that talk about working with property managers, they specifically say, make sure that you have like a cash reserve. I'm working on having a cash reserve, building up a cash reserve so that I specifically am covered for this. I'm not going to have any issues, but I don't like when these scenarios happen, because I don't want to work for somebody who's a net 30 or a net 60. I got away from that. But when you have a situation where a week after the majority of the work was done, you're being told, hey, guess what? There's some stuff you're going to have to go back and take care of. But then when you try to find out what's the timeline, how quickly do you need this done, because you're trying to make this work within your already existing schedule, and you don't hear anything for, a week, then how do you make it work? I have a very specific schedule. Right now, my schedule for this coming week is I've got multiple jobs every single day. There's no days that I don't have multiple jobs, because I have so many different things that need to get done. I've got a lot of materials sitting here that finally came in to complete some of these jobs, and I need to be able to get them done because I need to get the money to cover the materials. I know that there's people who would say you should be collecting deposits for materials if you're ordering stuff. And I'm not disagreeing with that, but most of these materials are like a couple $100. It's just there's so many of them. That's the problem. It's not that I've got, one job with $1,000 worth of materials. It's I've got 10 jobs with $100 of materials that are all sitting here, and that just adds up. Now, I don't actually have 10 jobs with 100. Most of it's like I think there's like maybe 4 pending jobs sitting over here that have like roughly, I don't know, maybe $3,000 worth of materials. So each job is about $500. And maybe I do need to go that route, but I haven't had any issues where I needed to cover any of that. So that's something that I would consider if it was a problem in the future, but it hasn't been yet. So all that being said, I don't know what's going to happen with that job. I'm sure I'll have an update next week, but that's the only thing that's kind of like up in the air right now. The total for the week was 7,655 of closed jobs. We're making sure that I say that as a point. It is a closed job. It means I invoice the customers. Not a bad week. Part of that is obviously the layover from last week. If you combine last week's total and this week's total, you're like sitting at like over $8,000, split over 2 weeks, still about $4,000, which is where I'd like to be. So I'm not complaining in any way, shape, or form about even when that happens, that's what it comes out to. Keep in mind, these totals do include materials. There are materials involved, obviously, in a lot of these jobs. The net profit is completely different than the net revenue. So while I'm giving you specific numbers on the revenue, keep in mind you still have expenses that come out of that. So Don't get blinded by the large number and be like, oh, wait, you can make 10 grand in a week. You can. But you also probably have a lot of materials involved in that, unless you have a larger crew. So all that being said, hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. We are really starting to climb up. I've been noticing more views on these specific episodes. I think I've said this before, but if you don't care about seeing the actual pictures and you don't want to necessarily see me just talking, you can listen to this in a podcast form through YouTube Music. Just search Handyman in the Field and it pops up as This Week in the Field. They release the exact same time through there, so you can listen to them while you're driving around. I listen to a lot of stuff while I'm driving around because there's a lot of driving. In addition to that, subscriber count's going up. I've been noticing some more comments. All of that's great. I really appreciate it. You can also follow us on TikTok. However, the content is exactly the same as far as the shorts. So any shorts that we release on YouTube will also be on TikTok. So there's that content as well. It's just Handyman in the Field over there, just like it is here. So with all of that being said, thank you guys so much for listening or watching. Thank you so much for subscribing, leaving comments, liking, sharing the video. Greatly appreciated. Love the growth. If you guys have any questions, be sure to leave them in the comments. I will make sure that I get back to you guys and answer those questions. Thank you guys so much for watching the latest This Week in the Field with the Handyman in the Field. We'll see you guys next time.